Vladimir Putin's new presidential car even shocked the Chinese president. Not because Xi Jinping hadn't seen expensive automobiles before, but because Putin handed him one as a gift. And what was inside made China's entire state vehicle program look like it was still catching up. These aren't just cars. They're rolling fortresses wrapped in national pride. To understand how that level of engineering is even possible, we first need to look at the most expensive presidential cars in the world. And it starts with a vehicle whose owner tried to sell it and couldn't find a single buyer. 10. The austerity scandal. In 2012, Mexican President Enrique P. Nieto took office promising fiscal responsibility, government transparency, and a crackdown on the kind of elite excess that had defined previous administrations. It was a compelling campaign message. Then his government purchased a fleet of armored Lincoln Navigators for presidential and cabinet use, and the optics collapsed faster than the peso. The most expensive political mistake Mexico put on four wheels. The Navigator fleet wasn't just expensive, it was symbolically catastrophic. P. Nieto had campaigned explicitly against government waste, positioning himself as a reformist breaking from the corrupt patterns of his predecessors. Buying a fleet of luxury American SUVs while simultaneously implementing austerity measures that cut public services sent a message his communications team spent years trying to walk back. The vehicles themselves were genuinely impressive from a security standpoint. Armored to withstand gunfire and explosive devices, equipped with communication systems, run flat tires, and the kind of reinforced chassis that makes standard road bumps feel like speed cushions. For a country where cartel violence regularly targets government officials, the security argument was legitimate. But legitimacy and optics rarely travel together in politics. When Andrés Manuel López Obrador won the presidency in 2018 on an anti-corruption platform, one of his first acts was ordering the sale of the presidential fleet. The Navigators, custom-armored, government-spec vehicles with limited civilian applications, went to auction. They sold for a fraction of their purchase price, because the market for used presidential armored SUVs is exactly as thin as it sounds. The fleet cost equivalent to building 50 fully equipped public schools, and it sold for less than the annual salary of the mechanics who maintained it. That was luxury bought at the worst possible moment. But the next car wasn't bought for luxury at all. It was built to make a political statement so calculated it doubled as industrial policy. 9. French-made statement. When Emmanuel Macron became French president in 2017, one of his first decisions wasn't about tax policy or foreign affairs. It was about which car he would ride in. And the choice was deliberate enough to make headlines across the European automotive industry. He chose a DS7 Crossback. French-made. Domestically manufactured by a brand most international observers had never heard of. France chose patriotism over prestige, then made it look like both. The DS7 isn't the most expensive or most powerful presidential vehicle on this list. It doesn't have the bulletproof pedigree of Germany's Mercedes or the handcrafted exclusivity of Britain's Bentley. What it has is a tricolor on the hood and a manufacturing address in France. And for Macron, that was the entire point. The choice was industrial policy disguised as transportation. By selecting a French-manufactured vehicle over the Mercedes-Benz S-Class that most European leaders default to, Macron sent a signal to French automakers, French workers, and French voters that the presidency would practice what it preached about supporting domestic industry. The most politically loaded car purchase in Europe wasn't in Germany. It was in Paris. But the DS7 isn't just symbolic. The armored presidential version carries encrypted communication systems, secure satellite links, and defensive modifications that transform a stylish crossover into a mobile command post capable of operating during national emergencies. The modifications cost significantly more than the base vehicle, pushing the total well past $100,000 for a car that looks, from the outside, like something a successful Parisian architect might drive, which is precisely the point. France's presidential vehicle is understated by design because Macron's political brand requires balancing European ambition with domestic relatability. Symbolism works until you need engineering. What comes next is a vehicle so mechanically precise it could survive a chemical attack while carrying the leader of Europe's largest economy. 8. German-engineered perfection. Germany's presidential vehicle is a Mercedes-Benz S600 Pullman Guard, and the specifications read less like an automobile brochure and more like a military procurement document. 4 tons of armored steel, 8-inch thick doors, run-flat tires that can carry the vehicle at speed even after being completely destroyed by gunfire, a cabin that seals hermetically against chemical and biological attacks, with an independent oxygen supply that keeps passengers breathing even if the air outside becomes lethal. The car costs more than the Chancellor's apartment. Merkel kept both for 16 years. The price tag exceeds $1.5 million per vehicle, making it one of the most expensive production-based presidential cars in the world. But unlike some entries on this list, where cost reflects gold fixtures or exotic materials, Germany's price reflects pure engineering. Every system serves a defensive purpose. Every modification addresses a specific threat scenario that German security services have modeled and prepared for. Angela Merkel used the same model throughout her entire 16-year chancellorship. A reflection of German pragmatism that prioritizes reliability over novelty. While other world leaders upgraded their presidential vehicles with each administration, Germany kept the same platform, updated its systems incrementally, and trusted the engineering rather than chasing prestige. 4 tons of vehicle, heavier than 2 full-grown hippos, faster than most family sedans. But the S600 Pullman Guard's most impressive feature isn't its armor or its weight, it's its discretion. The vehicle is intentionally understated in appearance, designed to blend into executive traffic rather than announce itself. No ostentatious modifications. No visible armor plating, just a very large, very black Mercedes that happens to be capable of surviving scenarios most military vehicles couldn't. German engineering sets the mechanical standard. But the next car wasn't engineered, it was crafted by hand in limited edition for a single passenger whose address was a palace. 7. 2 cars, 1 crown. In 2002, Bentley Motors did something it had never done before and has never done since. It built 2 completely bespoke automobiles, not based on an existing platform, not derived from a production model, but designed from the ground up for a single specific purpose: carrying the British monarch. One was presented to Queen Elizabeth II as a Golden Jubilee gift. The other was retained for state occasions requiring a second vehicle. 2 cars were built. One for the Queen, one gathering dust, waiting for the right royal occasion. The Bentley State Limousine has no official price because it was never sold. Bentley gifted the vehicles to the Crown, which means no transaction occurred, no invoice was issued, and no market value was ever established. Estimates place the cost somewhere between $10 million and $14 million per vehicle, based on comparable bespoke automotive projects. But those figures are educated guesses, because the actual cost exists somewhere in Bentley's internal accounts and the Crown's private records. What is known is engineering. The car stretches nearly 6 meters in length, with a cabin tall enough for the Queen to sit upright wearing a crown without adjustment. The transparent roof panel allows crowds to see the occupant, visibility being as important as protection for a monarch whose public appearances are themselves diplomatic events. The interior features hand-stitched leather, veneer woodwork, and wool carpeting woven to royal specification. Every material was sourced, approved, and installed according to standards that most luxury manufacturers don't encounter, because most luxury manufacturers don't have clients with this level of expectation. When your car is so exclusive it has no price, you've left the market entirely. Exclusivity takes many forms. But no presidential vehicle serves a dual purpose quite like the next one, built to make its passenger visible to millions while keeping them invisible to threats. 6. God's Armored Chariot. On May 13, 1981, Pope John Paul II was riding through St. Peter's Square in an open vehicle when a gunman shot him twice at close range. He survived, but the attempt changed Vatican security forever. Within months, engineers began designing a vehicle that solved an impossible problem. How do you keep a religious leader visible to hundreds of thousands of faithful while simultaneously protecting him from anyone trying to kill him? The answer was bulletproof glass. Blessed are the meek, but the bulletproof glass doesn't hurt. The Pope Mobile, officially a custom Mercedes-Benz M-Class with a raised glass enclosure, became the Vatican's engineering solution to a theological paradox. The Pope's ministry requires physical presence among crowds. His security requires the opposite. The glass enclosure splits the difference: maximum visibility, maximum protection, zero compromise on either requirement. The Vatican spent millions making sure God's representative on earth survives assassination attempts. The theology is complicated, but the Pope Mobile's design reveals something fascinating about protection engineering. Standard bulletproof vehicles hide their occupants behind opaque armor. The Pope Mobile inverts that logic entirely, replacing armor with transparency while maintaining the same protective capability. The glass is thick enough to stop rifle rounds, curved to eliminate distortion, and installed in a raised platform that gives crowds unobstructed sightlines to the Pope from hundreds of meters away. Every Pope since John Paul II has used a variation of the design, with each iteration incorporating updated materials and improved protective specifications. The vehicle has become as synonymous with the papacy as the White Cassock or the Vatican balcony. And unlike every other presidential vehicle on this list, the Pope Mobile serves crowds rather than avoiding them. Protection designed not to separate the leader from the people, but to keep him among them safely. Maximum visibility meets maximum protection. But the next car wasn't just built for protection, it was built to prove a point. Because when the world's second largest economy decides it doesn't need Western cars anymore, the result is something no one saw coming. 5. Red flag rising. China's presidential limousine is called the Hongqi N701, red flag in English. And the name tells you everything about the intention behind it. This isn't just a vehicle. It's an argument. An $800,000 argument that China doesn't need Mercedes-Benz, doesn't need Bentley, and doesn't need Western automotive engineering to build a presidential car worthy of the world's second largest economy. China didn't just build a presidential car. It built an argument. Xi Jinping began using the Hongqi N701 for state occasions starting around 2019, replacing the Audi A9-based platform that Chinese leaders had previously relied on. The switch was deliberate and politically loaded. China was in the middle of escalating trade tensions with the United States and Europe, and arriving at state functions in a domestically manufactured limousine sent a message that no press release could have communicated as effectively. The vehicle stretches over 6 meters in length, carries military-grade communications and encrypted satellite systems, and features defensive modifications that Chinese authorities have never fully disclosed. What is known comes from visual analysis of the vehicle and comparative intelligence assessments. Because China doesn't publish specifications for its leaders' transportation any more than it publishes nuclear launch codes. Professional opacity applied to automotive engineering. But here's what makes the Hongqi genuinely impressive beyond its political symbolism. China built it from scratch, using domestic engineering talent, domestic manufacturing, and domestic supply chains at a quality level that holds up against vehicles produced by manufacturers with decades of luxury automotive experience. The country that manufactures half the world's cars decided it was time to build one for itself. National pride has a price tag. But the next kingdom didn't worry about price tags. It just kept adding gold trim until the accountants stopped asking questions. 4. Kingdom on wheels. Saudi Arabia's King Salman doesn't travel in one presidential car. He travels in a convoy of them. 10 or more identical Mercedes-Benz S600 Pullman limousines moving in formation, each one custom modified to royal specification, each one worth over $500,000, and none of them distinguishable from the outside because the decoy system requires perfect visual. Uniformity. When you have oil money, standard options is an insult. The vehicles feature extended wheelbases that stretch the already long S600 Pullman into something closer to a rolling conference room. Gold interior fixtures. Custom upholstery sourced from materials that Mercedes-Benz doesn't offer in any catalog. Reinforced armor plating that pushes each vehicle well past its already considerable standard weight, and communication systems that allow the king to conduct affairs of state from the backseat of a car moving through Riyadh traffic. But the extravagance serves a strategic function beyond personal comfort. The convoy of identical vehicles creates the same decoy problem that Kim Jong-un's trains present to South Korean intelligence. Multiply the targets, and an attacker can't confirm which vehicle carries the actual target without information they shouldn't have. 10 identical limousines moving in formation means 10 potential attack vectors, each requiring separate intelligence to eliminate. The total cost of the Saudi presidential convoy, vehicles, modifications, maintenance, exceeds what most nations spend on their entire government vehicle fleet. And that's before factoring in the security personnel, advanced teams, and support vehicles that accompany every royal movement. $500,000 per vehicle multiplied across a convoy of 10. In a kingdom where 3 weeks of oil production could fund the entire fleet without touching the national budget. Oil wealth buys anything legally. But the next entry acquired its presidential fleet entirely illegally, and somehow made it look effortless. 3. Smuggled in luxury. North Korea is one of the most heavily sanctioned nations on Earth. United Nations resolutions specifically prohibit the export of luxury goods to the country, targeting the regime's ability to reward its elite class with imported extravagances, while the general population faces food insecurity and energy shortages. The sanctions are comprehensive, regularly updated, and enforced by a multinational monitoring apparatus. Kim Jong-un operates a fleet of Mercedes-Benz S600 Pullman limousines anyway. Sanctions banned luxury imports. Kim Jong-un apparently didn't get the memo. Each S600 Pullman costs over $500,000 in standard configuration. North Korea's presidential versions are custom armored, adding significant cost to vehicles that were already among the most expensive production cars on Earth. And every single one arrived in Pyongyang through an elaborate multi-country smuggling network that turned luxury automotive logistics into a sanctions evasion art form. The same UN that sanctions North Korea later published a detailed report tracing exactly how the cars got there. The route involved shell companies in multiple countries, falsified shipping documents, and a chain of intermediary dealers that moved vehicles through Japan, then China, then third-party brokers who handled the final delivery into North Korea. The logistics of smuggling a single $500,000 limousine through international customs multiple times likely cost more than the vehicle itself. A $500,000 car with a $2 million logistics bill. Priorities. But the smuggling operation reveals something important about how sanctions actually function against determined regimes. The prohibition exists, The monitoring apparatus exists. The evidence of violation gets published in UN reports that everyone reads and no one acts on with sufficient force to stop the next shipment. Kim's Mercedes fleet isn't just a luxury indulgence. It's a demonstration that sanctions create friction rather than barriers. They raise the cost and complexity of acquiring prohibited goods without making acquisition impossible for regimes willing to invest in creative logistics. The vehicles themselves are maintained by North Korean technicians working with parts sourced through the same smuggling networks that delivered the cars. When components fail, replacements arrive through channels that officially don't exist. When new models become desirable, the network activates again, and the fleet grows. Sanctions busting is impressive, but even the most elaborate smuggling operation can't compete with what happens when the world's largest military budget decides to build the most protected car ever put on a public road. 2. The American standard. The United States presidential limousine is officially a Cadillac. That's where the civilian resemblance ends. Cadillac 1, nicknamed the Beast by Secret Service agents, is a custom-built vehicle that shares nothing with any production automobile except the badge on its hood. Every component, every system, every material was designed and specified by the United States Secret Service, in collaboration with General Motors engineers who spent years building something that had never existed before. A vehicle capable of keeping the most targeted person on Earth alive under almost any conceivable attack scenario. It says Cadillac on the badge. Everything else says Pentagon. The specifications are staggering. 8-inch thick doors that weigh as much as a Boeing 757's cabin door. 5-inch thick bulletproof glass that can withstand armor-piercing rounds. A hermetically sealed cabin with an independent oxygen supply protecting against chemical and biological attacks. Run flat tires reinforced with Kevlar that can carry the vehicle at full speed even after being completely shredded by gunfire. A fuel tank wrapped in special foam that prevents explosion even when directly hit. And then there's what's inside the cabin itself. A supply of the president's blood type for emergency transfusions. A tear gas deployment system. Pump-action shotguns. Night vision equipment, a direct line to the vice president and the Pentagon that bypasses commercial communications networks entirely. The Beast costs $1, $5 million per vehicle, and the Secret Service maintains a fleet of them. Identical vehicles rotated to prevent predictable patterns and to ensure a functioning presidential limousine is always available, regardless of mechanical issues or attack damage. The per-mile operating cost exceeds that of most commercial aircraft. Every president gets the same car. Only the passenger changes. But the Beast has one vulnerability that no engineering can fully address. It's heavy. Enormously, operationally heavy. The vehicle weighs approximately 20,000 pounds, which means it handles like the armored fortress it actually is. In 2011, the Beast famously grounded itself on a speed bump leaving the U.S. Embassy in Dublin, its undercarriage scraping tarmac in full view of cameras while the presidential motorcade waited. The most protected car on Earth, defeated by Irish road infrastructure. American protection sets the security standard. But what shocks the world isn't just how protected a presidential car can be, it's when a country under sanctions builds one from scratch. Then casually hands it to a rival superpower's leader as a gift. The gift that shocked. In June 2018, Vladimir Putin arrived at a summit with Xi Jinping in Beijing, carrying something unusual for a head of state diplomatic meeting. Not a traditional gift, no artwork, no cultural artifacts, no symbolic gesture wrapped in historical significance. Putin brought a car. Specifically, he brought a brand new Urus Sonat limousine, handed the keys to the leader of the world's second largest economy, and watched Xi Jinping climb into a vehicle that Russia had built entirely from scratch, under sanctions, using domestic engineering that Western automotive experts had said wasn't capable of producing something at this level. Xi drove it around the Great Hall of the People's Courtyard, and the Chinese delegation was visibly stunned. Vladimir Putin's new presidential car even shocked the Chinese president, not because Xi Jinping couldn't afford a better car, but because Russia built one he hadn't seen coming. The Urus Senat isn't just a presidential limousine. It's a geopolitical statement on wheels, a rolling demonstration that sanctions designed to cripple Russian technological capability had failed to prevent the country from engineering one of the most sophisticated state vehicles ever built. Russia couldn't buy Western luxury, so it built something better, then gave one away. The Urus Senat project began in 2013 under the code name Cortege, Russian for motorcade, as a state initiative to replace the aging fleet of foreign manufactured vehicles that Russian leadership had been using since the Soviet era. The goal was total domestic manufacturing: Russian engine, Russian chassis, Russian interior, Russian electronics. No foreign components that could be restricted by sanctions. No dependency on Western suppliers who could be pressured by governments hostile to Moscow. The timing proved prescient. When Western sanctions intensified following the 2014 annexation of Crimea, Russia's automotive project was already underway. And when those sanctions specifically targeted Russia's ability to access Western technology and manufacturing partnerships, the Urus program continued because it had been designed from the beginning to operate without them. Professional defiance isn't a tactic. It's the entire engineering brief. The vehicle that emerged is genuinely impressive by any standard, not just relative to what Russia was supposed to be capable of producing under economic pressure. The Senat stretches over 6 meters in length, runs on a turbocharged V8 hybrid engine developed entirely by Russian engineers, and achieves performance figures that compete with comparable vehicles from Mercedes-Benz and Bentley. The hybrid drivetrain, unusual for a presidential limousine, gives the vehicle both power and range while demonstrating technical capability that Russia's critics assumed sanctions had made impossible. The armor package matches anything Western manufacturers offer at comparable price points. Bulletproof glass rated to withstand armor-piercing ammunition, steel and composite plating throughout the cabin and undercarriage. Run-flat tires capable of extended operation after being destroyed. A hermetically sealed interior with independent air supply for chemical attack scenarios. And communications systems developed by Russian defense contractors that allow Putin to maintain secure contact with military commanders regardless of external network conditions. The interior features hand-finished leather, rare wood veneers, and customization options that include gold trim packages requested by clients who want the vehicle to communicate wealth alongside capability. Putin's personal version is finished with restraint relative to what the platform allows. A deliberate choice that projects power without ostentatious excess. Because the car's story is the engineering, not the decoration. But here's what makes the Urus genuinely shocking beyond its technical specifications: the price. Estimated between $250,000 and $500,000 per vehicle, depending on specification level, the Senat costs a fraction of what comparable Western presidential vehicles command. Germany's Mercedes Pullman Guard exceeds $1.5 million. Britain's Bentley State Limousine has no price because it exists outside commercial markets entirely. Russia built a vehicle that competes with both for less than a third of the German car's price, using domestic manufacturing that Western analysts consistently underestimated. Russia didn't just prove it could build a presidential car under sanctions. It proved it could do it cheaper than the competition. Putin gifted Xi Jinping a car that Russia built to prove it didn't need help from countries like China. Xi drove it anyway. The gift itself was calculated diplomacy of the highest order. By presenting Xi with an Aurus Sonat, Putin accomplished several things simultaneously. He demonstrated Russian engineering capability to the leader most qualified to assess it, China being itself engaged in similar domestic automotive development projects. He created a visual moment that circulated globally, showing a Chinese president enthusiastically test driving a Russian car at a time when both countries were positioning themselves against Western economic pressure. And he established the Aurus brand in the consciousness of the world's most important emerging luxury market. The Chinese delegation's visible surprise wasn't just about the car's quality, it was about the implication. If Russia could build this under sanctions, the assumption that economic pressure translates directly into technological decline needed revision. And if China ever faced similar restrictions, a scenario becoming less hypothetical with each passing year of US-China trade tensions, Russia's example suggested that domestic alternatives were more achievable than Western analysts preferred to admit. In the years since the 2018 gift, the Aurus program has expanded. The Senate is now available for civilian purchase at prices that make it Russia's most expensive domestic production vehicle. A Senate convertible version was developed. An SUV variant called the Commandant entered production, and the brand has attracted interest from buyers in the Middle East and Asia who see purchasing an Aurus as both a luxury acquisition and a political statement about their relationship with Western economic frameworks. The estimated cost of Putin's personal fleet, somewhere between $250,000 and $500,000 per vehicle, multiplied across multiple Senate units maintained for presidential use, represents a country where the average annual salary sits around $8,000, roughly 30 to 60 lifetimes of ordinary Russian earnings per car. But the number that matters most isn't the price. It's the reaction on Xi Jinping's face when he climbed out of that Aurus in Beijing's courtyard, having just driven a vehicle that Russia wasn't supposed to be able to build. Gifted by a leader who understood that sometimes the most powerful diplomatic statement isn't a speech or a treaty. Sometimes it's handing your rival the keys and watching him realize he underestimated you.